Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here and welcome to the Getty online speaker series for teachers entitled Creativity, Change, and Courageous Imagination. I'm Brittany Prieto, the education specialist for youth programs here at the Getty and your host, and I'm excited to introduce our guest speaker today. Today, Cindy Meyers Foley will outline how teachers from all subject areas can apply the tools of art education to develop thriving cultures of creativity in classrooms and in the entire school. She will demonstrate how the willingness to model curiosity and enable thinking that imagines the world's possibilities can lead to a more beautiful, just, and equitable society. Cindy Meyers Foley is the Executive Deputy Director for Learning and Experience at the Columbus Museum of Art. She envisioned and led the charge to open the 18,000 square foot award-winning Center for Creativity in 2011. Cindy has been on the Harvard Project Zero Classroom Summer Institute faculty and regularly keynotes various museum, art, and education conferences. In November of 2014, she was a TEDx Columbus speaker presenting Teaching Art or Teaching to Think Like an Artist. In 2016, she was asked to retake the TEDx stage to present The Benefits of Boredom. In 2018, Cindy received the Ohio Distinguished Educator for Art Education Award. And in breaking news as of this very week, it was announced that Cindy is the next executive director for the Grand Rapids Art Museum. So with that, I will now pass things over to Cindy.
Hello. Thank you all for joining me tonight. I'm really excited about this, but let's go ahead and just dive in. So, creativity, change, and courageous imagination. I want to start by kind of giving you a sense of where we're going to go for the next 45 minutes. 3 parts. I want to make a case for why we need to change the way we've been talking about creativity. 2, I want to talk about intentionality. And 3, we're going to talk about ripple effects. So many of you may know, I'm currently at the Columbus Museum of Art, but shortly after I got there, there was a lot of, let's say, concern about whether our institution was relevant in its community anymore. And to be quite honest, we were launching a major capital campaign and we feared, and our research was showing that actually we weren't as relevant. People didn't see it as a meaningful part of their lives. So we had to begin to think differently about our purpose and value in a community. One of the things I realized during that time is that actually this relevancy issue wasn't just something I think my museum was experiencing, but that museums and actually schools were experiencing. And I realized that schools and museums aren't that different. And the reason why is because for, over 100 years now, we've been focusing on the same area, in particular in learning. And that area is content. We see our visitors, our students, as vessels that need to be filled with knowledge. And that's where the relevancy falls away. What happened at the Columbus Museum of Art was that we opened a Center for Creativity. It was an 18,000 square foot space, but really it was a philosophical shift for us. It was the decision that we were going to have a social mission. And what do I mean by that, a social mission? Well, we have a mission statement, but it was really, what is the change we want to be uniquely responsible for in our own community? And we wanted that change to be creative thinking. Now, that was a big idea, but something very fundamental to that idea was actually, first and very simply, adopting a definition for creativity. So I have here the one that we landed on, and it's kind of a hybrid between Sir Ken Robinson and some other folks, but I want you to look at this definition with me. Creativity is the process of using the imagination, and the imagination is the ability to conceive of what is not, and critical thinking, so the ability to analyze, synthesize, question, push at, to generate new ideas that have value. New ideas that have value. That was the key. So we did this, and we knew it was the right thing to do. It felt like the right thing to do, but it wasn't an automatic step. We realized we were actually going to need to make a case. There were a lot of folks who didn't want the museum to change. That wasn't the museum they'd understood or grown up with. So the case making became pretty important. I'm going to run you through a couple of the ways that we began to really significantly make this case. I'm going to start with a book. I think this is Tony Wagner's, one of Tony Wagner's book, and you can tell I just freaked out when I read this. What happens is NASA actually gives a test to thousands of folks who apply for jobs at NASA or work with NASA. And what they've found is that on average, 2% of the adult population are considered creative geniuses, 2%. What's interesting is there was a point in time in which someone at NASA said, you know what, I think with a couple modifications, we could give this exact same test to children. And here's the interesting part of that. When they decided to do that with children, the results were staggering. First off, those of you who have a 5-year-old in your life or know a 5-year-old, you won't be surprised by this. But what they found is that 98% of 5-year-olds were considered creative geniuses. Now, the staggering statistic here is what comes next. That what they found is that between the age of 5 and 10, that number drops from 98 creative genius, 98%, to 30. So what happens between the ages of 5 and 10? We go to school. Think about that. We're unlearning creativity once we start school. And sadly, look at the, by age 15, it's dropped to 12%. It's a continual loss of our creative capacity. The other case making that I thought was pretty profoundly important was something that we got from the World Economic Forum. The World Economic Forum actually every 5 years predicts the skills that we're going to need in the future. What are the skills businesses are going to need specifically, but what are the skills most critical in the next 5 years? So back in 2010, when we were starting this work, the 2015 report came out, and we were thrilled because creativity for the first time had made the list. It'd come in at number 10. And we were ecstatic because we had predicted this. We'd looked at IMLS's report on 21st century skills. We knew it was coming. What we didn't expect is that the next report 5 years later would come out and creativity would make the biggest jump in the history of the report. It would move from number 10 to number 3. So at this stage, we're all predicting it probably land at number 1 in the next report. What we did not, again, predict was that instead, the next report actually took creativity and broke it down into its elements. And nearly 7 of the identified skills are actually all aligned with creativity. They're all in some way, shape, or form an aspect of creativity. So pretty staggering results just from 2 studies. I could give you a dozen more. You think that would pretty much do the trick, right? That should convince almost anyone that we should be focusing on creativity, right? Well, not exactly. And the challenge became that we had another obstacle. And that obstacle was the myths attached to creativity. Now, I can let you all kind of take a moment and think about some of those myths that we know exist in creativity. You can even pop them in the chat and see what other people are thinking too. There are lots of myths that are out there. Many people can recall, especially those of you who are art teachers or work in this field, you know what the myths are. But for the purposes of today, I decided to find just one source, and that source tells us that the number one myth is that creativity comes from creative types. And that source is Fast Company. They've done some research in 2007. So what do we mean when we say creative types? Who are we talking about? What are creative types? Well, I use a very sophisticated research tool. And that research tool is called Google Images. And I jest, but seriously, if you want to get the zeitgeist for what people think of when they think of something, just go to Google Images. And this is what people think of when they think of creative types. Now, we could look at this and say, they're all white males. That's another conversation for another talk. But what do we see when we see these images? We see artists, musicians, and Steve Jobs. Like, that's where the zeitgeist lives. This is what we think of when we think of creative types. And that is a problem for all of us. Those of us who are advocating for creativity have to overcome this stereotype, this myth attached to creativity. Now, you could take it from me, or you can even take it from those we all acknowledge are incredibly creative human beings. So let's look at this. What does Picasso say about creativity? He says, every child is an artist. The problem is how to remain an artist once we grow up. Or this Maya Angelou, you can't use up creativity. The more you use, the more you have. What I like about what Maya Angelou used to talk about, she used to say that it's like an exercise, that we wouldn't go try to run a marathon, but that the more we practice, the more our brains and bodies are trained for creativity, but you have to practice it. Or Joseph Beuys, every human being is an artist, a freedom being, called to participate in transforming and reshaping the conditioned thinking and structures that shape and inform our lives. I think in this moment, that quote is so critically important as we look at the state of the world. We must be creative. The other myth that I hark on all of the time is this notion that somehow art skill equals creativity. And you all have seen this in action, but let me just give you an example. Once we opened the Center for Creativity, I would be walking through the halls of the museum and I would hear people say, Cindy, we love what's happened with the Center for Creativity. It's absolutely fabulous. What you're doing, and they would often say, for the children, but I'm not creative. I can't even draw a stick figure. I take a deep breath when I hear this, because what they're saying is my ability to draw or paint equals my ability to be creative. If you leave with nothing else, you've got to help me kill this myth. The challenge with this here is that when we say that, what we are saying is that an art skill is somehow what creativity is. But that definition I shared with you is about developing new ideas. Art skill are just ways, they're means to get ideas into the world. They're mechanisms for us to share those ideas. So yes, drawing and painting and sculpting are ways of getting ideas in the world, but so is cooking and gardening, writing. I have a colleague, Amanda. And the thing about Amanda is we will be in a meeting and I will see her mind going because we will be grappling with a gnarly problem. And I'll know what she wants to do is to actually get back to her office so that she can use her medium to generate new ideas. What is her medium? Her medium, my friends, is Excel spreadsheets. I'm telling you, nobody knows how to make magic out of Excel spreadsheets like her. But that is her medium. That is her way of getting ideas out into the world. So we've all got to reflect on why does this keep coming up and how do we kill this myth? Again, you can believe me or you can take it from someone like George Brock. George says, painting is a nail to which I fasten my idea. So in this first section, there are two takeaways I want you to just hold on to. One, the evidence is clear. Creativity isn't just a good thing. My friends, it's a necessity. And folks are counting on us as educators, art educators, museum educators, classroom educators, to prepare students to be creative agents. The other takeaway is societal perceptions of art and creativity are counterproductive. The focus on the product, the genius of the artist or the technique, in part, some of the own work we've done has caused some of this problem. Section 2, being intentional. So one of the things that happened shortly after opening the Center for Creativity is we'd gotten some great press. And I remember going to my office phone and answering the phone, listening to the voicemail. And I had something like 70 voicemail calls in those early weeks. I had not prepared myself for what was about to take place. We had prepared to open a Center for Creativity. We had not prepared to hear from superintendents, principals, teachers, corporations, universities, asking, now that we'd opened the Center for Creativity, how could we help them? How could we help them bring more creativity into their spheres? That led us to do a lot of internal digging. We started with artists in our collection, looking at artists that we knew, artists that we'd studied. And then we analyzed what are the creative dispositions that artists particularly embody. And we came up with this list of 9. And so what you see here are a list of things that we've analyzed and synthesized and worked on for quite some time. But I'm only going to focus on a couple. And first, I just want you to see how they kind of manifest in our gallery spaces. So for example, how are we allowing our visitors in a museum space generate ideas and reflect on those ideas? How are we also allowing for them to play? Where are we giving them the process of being creative? So you might see these two older gentlemen here in an op art gallery where the persistence of vision is something they can play around with by just using rubber bands and boards, but allowing them to play with the ideas that artists engage in. Or even just in our lobby. Sometimes we had to find clever ways of allowing our audiences to engage in thinking. So for this one, we wanted them to imagine, and we gave them a simple prompt. We had cards with 3 dots or 2 dots on them, and we said, imagine more than dots. And they did. Hundreds, if not thousands of these are created and left on the walls every day. Folks want to be creative. And here's the interesting thing to share with you all. We did think in the beginning, maybe most of these creative prompts would be completed by children or youth. Our research has shown that actually upwards of 75 to 78% of all the prompts in the museum, all the ways in which we engage in creative thinking, are generated by adults. Adults are more hungry than this than I think we even are giving them credit for. So intentionality, one thing we realized pretty early on is that we needed to be far more intentional about one of those dispositions, and that was curiosity. So let's talk about curiosity. I was shocked when I found this research study by Susan Engel. She had wanted to embed herself in two classrooms, kindergarten and fifth grade classrooms. She'd gotten quite a bit of funding to do this work. And what she was looking for was curiosity in the classrooms. And she said, this was her quote, "Research has shown over and over again that kids learn best when they are seeking the answers to their own questions." Thinking about that, to their own questions, not the questions that a teacher poses, but their own questions. So Susan wanted to see, how does this show up in classrooms? But the study had to be canceled. Why, you ask? This is heartbreaking, folks. It turned out to be impossible because there was such an astonishingly low rate of curiosity in any of the classrooms that they visited. Think about that. Our desire to know something on our own had diminished by kindergarten and fifth grade. Curiosity. As we dug more into curiosity, I happened upon a writer, Warren Berger. If you're interested in this, get his books, they're fabulous. But Warren helped us to understand that curiosity is actually can be seen through a set of called the wonder circle. And that set of thinking skills here starts with wonder, which is a state of being, curiosity, which is a condition, and questioning, which is an action. Okay, so that's hard to really conceptualize. So I'm going to give you some images to help you process it. Wonder. Wonder is suspended disbelief. It is, if any of you have toddlers in your life, they are the most in tune with wonder. Because suspended disbelief is when we experience something that we don't quite know how to process. So for example, these were images my husband caught of my daughter in a split moment when she sees her shadow and she doesn't know how to process it. And within seconds, she goes through the wonder cycle. And what does she try to do? She tries to jump away from her shadow. She goes, wonder, curiosity, and question. The question is the action as she tries to understand and process this phenomenon or experience that she's happening. Wonder can happen in just a brief set of seconds, but it's where our brain is trying to take as much as possible. I love working in an art museum because I feel like museums are kind of like wonder factories. If you look at this image of these girls, what you'll notice is some of them are still in a state of wonder. And there's actually a phenomenon called the wonder phase. And it's in that moment where they're still processing. Now, some of these girls have moved to excitement, but those that are still in wonder, what they have are the wide open mouth and wide eyes. And the reason for that look on their face is because they are intaking as much information as possible while they look at something and try to make sense of it. Wonder is phenomenal because it's the gateway for our curiosity. It actually activates it quicker than anything else. What I love about wonder is it can show up nearly anywhere, but the place it probably shows up most is nature, or at least outdoors. Oops, I'm going to try to get this video. And you'll see here a soccer field in the Midwest where we've gotten way too much water, but how many adults pass this up? Whereas a child sees that, experiences that phenomenon, and then immediately goes through the wonder cycle. Wonder, curiosity, and questioning. It's the way kids process the world, try to make sense of it. Here's the thing about questioning. Questioning is key for us to be creative. And yet, the average child, young child specifically, asks 125 probing questions every day. Again, if you have a 4 or 5-year-old, you know this. But the average adult asks a mere 6. Think about that NASA study again. How are we slipping away from wonder, curiosity, and questioning? I'm a huge fan of Edith Cobb, and Edith, for decades, has been writing about wonder and creativity. And I need to read this one quote because I think she nails where we need to shift our thinking. The sense of wonder is spontaneous, prerogative of childhood. When it is maintained as an attitude or as a point of view in later life, wonder permits a response of the nervous system to the universe that incites the mind to organize novelty of pattern and form out of incoming information. The ability of the adult to look upon the world with wonder is thus a technique, an essential instrument of the work of the poet, the artist, or the creative thinker. Where is wonder? For those of us who care about creativity, this is possibly the most important question. Where is wonder for you? Where does wonder show up in your own life? Where are you making space for wonder? You may think, oh, how will I do it? Well, again, I think we can borrow from artists. Artists are showing us all the time where wonder is in their life. One of my favorite things to do is find artists and follow them on Instagram. And what I find is that artists often will share their own work, but they love to share with anybody who will watch where they find wonder, curiosity, and questioning. So just to some of them that I pulled off, you've got Sean over here coming out of Lowe's Hardware, and what does he see? Are they lines on the pavement, or in his mind, it's the Stranger Things season 1 lines, right? Or 2, another artist where she came out of her house the same time every morning and documented the sun and the radiance of the sun, so we can see just how it changed over time. Or to the right over here, you've got an architect, Michael, who the way architects see things completely changes our total interpretation of a place, an idea. Artists also have an incredible sense of humor. So you've got Andy here seeing Voldemort in his toasted marshmallow, or Mark Dion, of course, finding the abject in a chunk of cheese that's been left behind. Where is wonder in our life? How do we capture wonder? We can use simple things like our phones. Intentionality. When we talk about intentionality, often what I try to get folks to focus on is, why does it matter and what are we going to do to improve it? So again, when we're intentional about curiosity in our lives, we must focus first on ourselves. Where's curiosity and questioning? How do we model that for others? But when it comes to imagination, we also need to be practicing this. So imagination is one of those other 9 conditioned or dispositions on that chart. And imagination is simply stated the ability to conceive of what is not, the ability to have an idea. Einstein knew just how important imagination was. His quote here is well known, but worth reading again. Imagination is more important than knowledge. Think about that first or second slide I showed, where museums and schools, what have we been focusing on? We're focusing on content delivery, knowledge, the attainment of knowledge. But what he knew is our ability to think is far more important than the knowledge that we just hold on to. I want us to think a little bit about Einstein for a little bit longer. And in specific terms, I want you to think about Einstein in the year 1919. 1919 was actually a very telling and trying time in our country. It was the second year of a major pandemic, but 1919 was also an extraordinary year for innovation and creativity. For example, in 1919, Einstein's theory of relativity was proven. At a time where we felt despair, some amazing things were happening in the world. But unfortunately, 1919 was also a time of upheaval. And in particular, the Red Summer of 1919 was the most violent year against Black bodies our country had ever seen. The parallels between the years 1918, 1919, and 1920 are so insanely similar to the years we've just lived through. But something extraordinary I want you to focus on, really, really think about, is something else that happened in 1919. It was the beginning of the Harlem Renaissance. The Harlem Renaissance would become America's first true original art form. And what is important to know about the Harlem Renaissance is it emerged in 1919 with profound literary, art, and musical accomplishments. But what was key to this time, in this moment, was that it was a group of individuals who were tired of how the world perceived them. They were tired of the violence against their own bodies. They were tired of the way the world was, and they wanted to imagine it not as it was, but as it could be. So they changed the narrative. The Harlem Renaissance essentially reframed Black life, Black culture, and Black existence. This is really important. The Harlem Renaissance instilled in African Americans across the country a new spirit of self-determination and pride, a new social consciousness, a new commitment to political activism, all of which would provide a foundation for the civil rights movements of the 50s and 60s. Think about that, an art movement that imagined the world not as it was, but as it could be, changed the entire trajectory for our country. Imagination. All imagination requires some level of courage. Think about that. When we imagine something. We conceive of something that has not been conceived of before. What it requires us to do is to set aside our expertise and to actually step outside of our lane. This is one of the reasons why the research shows that there are two types of people that actually resist imagination. And one group is those that are comfortable with their own ignorance. But the other group that's often resistance are experts, that they have trouble leaving that space of knowing. But it is absolutely required if we want to make the world different, better. In particular, if we want courageous imagination. Courageous imagination is our capacity, and I'm going to say this over and over again, the capacity to visualize our world not as it is, but as it could be. It's what the folks in the Harlem Renaissance did. They imagined something that was better than the moment they were living, and they manifested it. This is what we all need more of today. The important thing to know about courageous imagination, when imagination becomes so activated that we begin to change the world due to it, it also brings about hope, hopefulness. It is a direct link to our health and well-being. For this final portion of our talk, I'm going to focus on ripple effects. The ripple effects that we all can have if we become more intentional about cultivating creativity in our spheres. Something happened to me at some point about a year or two before the pandemic. I'd had a group of teachers. They'd not participated in our professional development, but they had decided to just come and visit the museum. And they asked to talk to me for about 30 minutes. We chatted, we talked about imagination, we talked about play, and then they left. And I didn't hear from them until about 6 months later. And one of them reached out to me to say, hey, so we need to make a confession. And our confession is that when we visited your museum, we actually ended up stealing like about 200 of those Imagine More Than dot cards. And what they explained next was that the two teachers on the far left there, they were first and third grade. And they were very concerned that they could not figure out where could they insert more imagination in their kids, in the classrooms and in their kids' lives. Until one of them realized, wait, you know where there would be space? And I don't know, many of you are in California, so you may not be familiar with this concept at all, but here in Ohio, February, there's something called indoor recess. And in February, they're stir crazy. And they said, wait a minute, what if we were to engage them in these dot exercises during indoor recess? And they did. And what happened next is kind of wild. What I guess happened is they started passing them out, and soon the students had used them all and wanted more, and were asking for more. And then kids from other classrooms are coming over and asking, where are those dot drawing things at? And pretty soon the principal wanders down and says, hey, I keep getting these drawings with these red dots. What's going on? And it was their moment for these two educators to say, yeah, so we need to change something. The fact that we can only focus on imagination during recess is insane. And they had a hard talk with that principal. And what the principal said was, okay, what if we focus next year on finding space and time? But you two would need to lead this effort for the school. And they agreed. So these two teachers decided everything from the beginning of school activities throughout the rest of the year would focus on the imagination. So they had stolen some of those cards, but then they invited me back to see what they had started to do by October. And I walked through the building where the Imagine More Than Dot cards covered every surface of that school. And some of these drawings were extraordinary. I got to share a couple with you. Aren't they amazing? Quite clever there, using the dot to lure the dog in. It was elementary school after all. Look at that. Imagine More Than Dot. But what happened next indicates just how these ripple effects can take place. These two teachers were so successful in their school, pretty soon the superintendent and the district office had heard about what they were doing and invited them to lead creativity workshops for the entire district. And I got to show up and watch how they were now leading these efforts and making this intentionality something for others. They were leading this intentionality across the school. Two teachers started a movement in their community within their sphere of influence. What I want you to remember and hold on to right now is that we have power. It may not feel like it. And honestly, there have been times in my career I've wondered, why do I keep trying? But we do have power. And when we see that opportunity, we need to wield our power, especially for the things that we care deeply about, that we know are going to make a difference. As creative leaders, we need to evolve our messaging. We need to activate our superpower to catalyze creativity. And we need to strive for courageous imagination and bring about the hope and change that we need and deserve. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Cindy. I'd like to invite anyone with questions to please feel free to ask them in the Q&A feature so that Cindy can address some of them and we can continue the conversation there. Cindy, we did have a couple questions come in already. One which will take us back towards the beginning of your presentation, at which time you shared a graph of creativity declining by age range. And one of our participants today was asking what year or that study or test was from, if you could remind us.
That's a great question that I don't have the answer to. So I know that chart is from a Tony Wagner book that is on my desk. So I will promise you all, Brittany, I will go look for that. But if anybody, Tony Wagner is somebody I think is powerful for us as educators to have his research. If you need to do case making, a lot of it's in there. And I've used a lot of his work, but he would be able to unravel. I'm sure it's in that book. So okay. Sorry, I don't have the
No worries. Thank you for that. And what we will do on our end is our participants get a follow-up email. We can integrate that information or any other points that we might not be able to answer on the spot into that upcoming email. Another question that came in was, I'm going to read it verbatim from here. It says, I'm curious, what other strategies did they use besides the dots? Or where can you find more ideas? Also, can I create my own dot paper? Is it just pulling random dots on a paper for student use?
Great question. One of the things we've learned, and we've been doing this work for, quite some time now. And what we found are creative challenges are the easiest way to activate creativity in your classroom, because what they allow you to do is just practice creativity all the time. So think about this. The Imagine More Than Dots activity was just something we came up with. It is just a larger index card with 3 of those dots on it that you get when you're doing like a garage sale or something. We had them lying around, we were messing about, and of course now we probably have taken stock out in those dots. But then after a while, we realized we could just make, we have gotten them printed, so it's cheaper that way. But we've come up with probably 200-300 different kind of creative prompts like that. And if you go to the Columbus Museum of Art website, in our resources, there is an area that has just creative challenges galore. And many of those are also ones we've stolen from teachers. Teachers come up with these too. And they can be simple things, simple prompts. Sometimes we just use one material, but it might be like twist ties, and we might say something to the effect, make something the world needs but doesn't currently have. But all you can use are twist ties or tinfoil sheets, something very simple. And what it does by using materials like that is it keeps it from being precious, because there's no way to make something, well, actually, I should take that back. There is a way to make something extraordinary using those materials, but most people won't overthink it. So a lot of our creative challenges are really materials that lower that threshold, and interesting prompts that get you thinking. That's the key. How do we activate the thinking?
I'm struck also with, in using simple materials, it opens up the possibility and the inspiration for people to keep being creative outside of a designated creative space or a designated museum. If you can look at a household object and think about a creative challenge there, it's something they can carry with them, which is really exciting.
Absolutely.
So maybe we'll be able to link to where those creative challenges are on the website for our
Absolutely.
as well.
I'll get to that link.
Another question came up noting that one of our participants works exclusively with adults, and are there resources or activities specifically for that age range, or do you see these as being fairly universal?
So this is something that's a bit controversial, but I feel pretty strongly about it. I find that most of these creative challenges and most of these, we use a ton of thinking routines. I should have mentioned that the partner we started working with pretty early on, when we were inundated with calls from our community around creativity, is Harvard's Project Zero. And in particular, that's in the Graduate School of Education. And Project Zero has been focused for nearly 50 years on creative thinking, especially in and through the arts. So, we weren't experts, but we knew where we could find folks. So another great resource is, all of you've got to get on PZ's website. And thinking routines in particular are brilliant, because we use the same routine with kindergartners as I use with our med school students. So think about that, the same routine. Now, what comes out of those routines? So let me give you an example of a routine. See, think, wonder. See, slowing down, really taking time to look. Think, what are we thinking about? What does it make us think about? Wonder, what is our questioning? That same routine will have very different responses depending on the group, but the actual routine is effective no matter what the age or the type of group you're working with. Same with those creative prompts. Just yesterday, I worked with a group of university students using tinfoil and some additional materials, giving them the same prompt 2 weeks ago we had used with a group of middle schoolers, thinking about creating something that your neighbor needs, but they may not know that they need. And that was the prompt, but I used the same prompt for both. It's maybe the level of discourse can be different, but actually it's the type of thinking that we're intentional about bringing about.
Thank you. Another question I see over in the chat in this one is someone noted, I teach in an IB public school and our teachers face the challenge from district demands to teach how teach how we know we should teach. Teachers feel like they have to choose, I think, between probably meeting the demands, hitting standards, and having this possibility for imagination and play in the classroom.
Yeah. So I will tell you, this is where it gets confusing to me. So, for example, in the past month, I have made 2 presentations to groups of superintendents. One of them is called Ed Leader 21, and these are superintendents that specifically are trying to change, but they tend to be from incredibly, well-performing, high-performing schools. But superintendents know that there is more that needs to be happening than just content delivery and content memorization. Here's the kicker. They don't know how to shift though. And so I think what the challenge is that we actually have to, in some ways, teach up, which I'm not going to tell you that that isn't annoying. It's horrible that we're having to gauge and help them determine what that can look like and how they need to make more space for it. But they are keenly aware that what's happening in classrooms isn't actually serving students. So in some ways, the more we can work with superintendents, demonstrate the intentionality and the outcomes of what we're doing, the better the effect. But they have to also they have to engage in this kind of learning as well.
I think the example you gave towards the end of your presentation is a great case study in teachers who brought it into the recess period, brought it into the classroom, brought it to the principal, and then it continued to have that ripple effect, as you said.
Absolutely.
We had a question about asking, how do you evaluate and document the innovative evidence within your projects?
Great question. And this is, again, I'll give Project Zero a lot of credit. We are huge fans of Project Zero's work with the Reggio Emilia schools of Italy, and in particular, the way they use documentation. So I could probably talk 40 minutes about this. I won't, but I will say what documentation allows you to do is evaluate the thinking. If you are documenting, it's most easily seen, in Reggio early childhood classrooms, where as the students are thinking, you're documenting, you're having them put post-it notes, or in young children, you're writing their thinking down. You're making it visible, but it also makes it something that you can reflect on, and then you as an educator can go back and determine, my intention was this. Here was the type of thinking that evolved. Here's what we then decided to do because of that thinking. And that's a way to make a case for something. It also is how Project Zero has done a lot of their research in looking at how do we evaluate and make thinking more intentional. So they have a ton of resources on how to use documentation as a methodology for really understanding what's going on in our classroom and making that more visible.
Great. And I'll end with one last question here, but Cindy, I hope you see over in the chat, it's a plethora of great feedback and people sharing ideas across classrooms really about how they can integrate this into their work. So let's say this last question would be, do you have any examples of creative projects or creativity with sound, rhythm, and language? So going beyond the visual creative examples you've given us.
Absolutely. I'm not going to be able to land on one particular thing right now, but I'm going to give you an example of something that a teacher did that I think gives you a sense of where this can go. And our most current work is actually a project called Cultivating Creative and Civic Capacities. So we've been working with a group of educators for over a decade now, and many of them found that the more they focused on creative thinking in their classroom, the more the students began to ask questions about civic issues, civic ideas. And as we watched, so we were documenting many of the teachers, we were going into their classrooms and we were watching that happen. We realized the more creativity, the more curiosity about our civic world, our civic lives. One of the teachers began to really jump on that, and they actually created a project called Shine a Light. And Shine a Light asked the students to pick a social issue that meant something to them. And then what they challenged them to do was to create a light fixture. They gave them a bulb and one of those, cords, but they had to construct a light fixture that would actually shine a light down on that social issue that they were curious about or wanted to dig into. And I think it just demonstrates the way that teachers sometimes are using art, but in this case, a teacher that was very focused on getting kids to think about social issues. How do you incorporate the different art forms? You could do a dance that would shine a light onto some sort of a social issue. You could create a piece of music that really would respond to a social. Again, it's how do we bring these things together that allows for the kids to do the thinking and the digging and the research and to be kind of agents of their own projects and work.
Thank you for that, Cindy. I feel inspired in creativity and imagination. I have a 5-year-old at home, so we'll see if I can match her in her imaginative play.
That's right. That's right.
Thank you so much, Cindy, for joining us
Yeah.
today. This is the conclusion of our guest speaker series this year. So a huge thank you again to Cindy Meyers Foley, and thank you for joining us today. We hope you all have a wonderful evening.